Hi everyone, welcome to the Quipster Film Review Podcast. My name is Vince Leo, I'm the author of the film review website Quipster.net. You can find all of my written reviews there anytime. Quipster.net is where to go, even reviews that you don't hear right here on the Quipster Film Review Podcast. I also want to remind you that in addition to the podcast that you hear here, I also do podcasting work for the In-Session Film Podcast, the Extra Film segments. So you can check out all of those recent episodes of the Extra Film segments as well as the main show, because JD Duran and Brendan Cassidy are fantastic film critics and they do a wonderful show. Go to InSessionFilm.com for more details. Today I'm going to be looking at a film called Donald Cried. It's an independent film that was funded primarily through Kickstarter. It's a comedy with dramatic elements. It's not rated, but I definitely would say it's rated R because of a shot of graphic nudity as well as language and drug use, and it runs an hour and 25 minutes. The main stars are Jesse Wakeman and Christopher Avedisian, with Louisa Krause in a supporting role. The director and the screenwriter is Christopher Avedisian. As far as what the film is about, Jesse Wakeman stars as Peter Latang. He's in his late 30s. He's a New York banker who, after his grandmother passes away, reluctantly returns to his hometown in Warwick, Rhode Island, for the first time in about 2 decades, really, to tidy up his grandmother's estate. Unfortunately, he inadvertently loses his wallet en route, and that causes him to seek out his old high school friend named Donald Trebeck, played by Kris Avedisian. All he really wants is a few bucks, but he hasn't really been in contact with Donald for about as long as he has bailed on his past. And while Peter has matured to the point where he virtually disowns the metalhead delinquent he once was, Donald has yet to move on. He's perpetually stuck reliving the only time in his life when he felt genuinely happy, or so he imagines he was happy. While Peter just wants to get out of town as soon as possible, getting money out of Donald proves to be quite a challenge, partially because Donald is also broke, and partially because Donald, who's desperately trying to connect with his old friend since they've parted ways, he wants to keep hanging out and to relive those glory days with the last true friend he's ever had. Donald Cried is an expansion of a 2012 short film, also done by the same people, starring Avedisian and Wakeman, and it falls under the category of, I guess you would call it a cringe comedy, where you find laughs in awkward moments, usually due to an overbearing and unaware cad of a character that perpetually finds ways to embarrass others around him. While this has somewhat become a staple in terms of indie and television comedies, it's a pretty effective way to show the humanity underneath the comedic shenanigans. It offers moments of pathos for characters that may have otherwise come off as one-dimensional. We've seen this subgenre become successful in films like What About Bob or TV shows like The Office, as well as gain Academy Award nominations in excellent films like Tony Erdmann, a film to which Donald Cried actually shares some coincidental narrative similarities. Now, at a certain point in Donald Cried, you realize that this is one of those cases where one of the characters is going to have to give. Either the man-child Donald has to finally let go of his past and the friend who left a long time ago, or Peter has to unpeel the layers of his stuffy persona that he's adopted over the years in order to mature into the world of a big city businessman and just relax and come to terms with who he once was. The layers are certainly what's been provided by its screenwriter, director, co-star Christopher Avedisian. He makes what could have been a purely irritating character someone who emerges wholly sympathetic, and he reveals the significance of a moment alluded to in the title that encapsulates the love-hate relationship between this dorky misfit just looking for a connection and this lonely guy who befriends him while also wanting to maintain his distance from what ends up being a perpetual source of his own embarrassment. The film is represented as a day in the life for these characters, taking place all within the course of about a day. Donald takes Peter to his old stomping grounds. They have run-ins with people from their old school days, though these are memories that aren't ones Peter is fond to dig up. He outright disowns them in a couple of instances. So Donald Cried, while amusing, it's not always playing for overt laughs. In fact, you may find yourself limited to laughing inside at most of the antics, perhaps due to gaining enough compassion for these characters to be both entertained comedically from a distance, but also to have some empathy for their particular suppressed pain that governs their current behavior. So really, this is a film that tickles the funny bone, and it also breaks the heart at the same time. Donald Cried, as a film, is the thematic representation of the difficult resolution among many of us who've matured into life but still must resolve our own awkward upbringings, We at once wish to distance ourselves from the vulnerable and confusing days where we earned a reputation that we're not exactly proud of, but we also realized that in those pursuits that led to the embarrassment, there was also a fun factor involved in taking those immature risks. Peter and Donald in this film, while seemingly polar opposites, are merely two sides of the same coin. They exhibit both sides that many men experience of externally portraying the man one thinks they should be, while also stifling that inner child inside. While we might escape our past, we also carry it with us, perhaps taking a re-establishment of dormant connections to tap into yet again, for better or worse. And while its indie film sensibilities, its improvisational, conversational style, its sorrowful underpinnings to the comedy, as well as the offbeat characterizations may not necessarily hit home for everyone who watches it, I do think that Donald Cried is one of those films that, like Donald himself, threatens to irritate initially before ultimately growing on you. It lingers in your memory even days after seeing it, and soon too you may come to terms with the fact that you, deep down, like Donald Cried, even if you were initially standoffish. Now, for those who are immediately in tune with what Donald Cried has to say, I would suspect that it won't take you 20 years to revisit Donald and his old stomping grounds with a rewatch. So 3 stars out of 4 is what I'm going to give Donald Cried. 3 stars on my scale means that I recommend this film. It's not for everyone, but I do think that if you like independent films, and if any of this thematic material strikes home with you, I do encourage you to go out and see it. It's definitely a unique experience, even if you've seen other films that are similar to it. I think that it is a layered comedy and ultimately proves worthwhile for those people who are open to it. Thanks everyone for listening. I hope that you enjoyed this review, and I do encourage you, if you want to support this show, there's 2 ways that I encourage you to do it. One is to go to iTunes and leave a review, because that definitely helps find an audience for this show that encourages me to keep it going. And also, you can go to patreon.com/Quipster and leave a donation because of the costs of the show in order to go out and see these movies, as well as to provide hosting for the podcast and for the movie reviews. I basically pay to give you these reviews, so anything that you can contribute is highly appreciated. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, if you want to catch more of my podcasting work, go to InSessionFilm.com. In fact, JD Brennan and I just reviewed the original Disney Beauty and the Beast animated feature from 1991, as well as a film that's currently out in theaters, at least at the time of this recording, A United Kingdom. So if you want to hear my takes on that, go to InSessionFilm.com for that.